Hey guys, thanks for coming back again to Open Table. And this week we're going to continue our discussion through the book of Psalms. I hope so far in the series that you've had a time to kind of reflect and process, and maybe you're getting to learn a little bit more about holistically what the book of Psalms has to teach us through the scripture. Remember that Open Table is a place where you can express doubt, where you can ask hard questions, where you can disagree with people. And we're also all coming from the understanding that we want to grow in our relationship with God and grow in our knowledge of the Bible. So let's get going. So as we continue looking through Psalms, it's really important that we keep the purpose of why we're going through this in the first place in front of us. So David and other authors, they had this connection with God, and they used the book of Psalms in their writings. It's their prayers, it's the songs that they had written to God, it's the poetry, just kind of this creative expression of what was inside, what they were dealing with, what they were feeling in the book of Psalms. And you see that God actually interacts with each one of those people. He actually has a personal relationship with each one. And that's what makes this dialogue so helpful, as you can see the highs and lows and the ups and the downs of their lives. And so, we've talked about sort of true north being the only way to get to where we're meant to go. We've talked about what to do when God seems far away, how to respond to God in the midst of suffering. And we kind of have talked through a lot of these ideas. And so I guess in this session, we're going to go back and look at what it would mean, like if we had favor with God. What would that look like if God looked upon us and he was pleased with us? What would that do for our lives? Is that even a thing? Does God even give out favor to people? Is that even possible? And so in this session, we're going to look at that and how should we approach God in a way that's pleasing to him? Because if he's God, if he's this all-powerful being, how are we supposed to approach this God? How are we supposed to do that? And I guess we should get started. But before we get started, let's dive in with a question. And here's the thing, okay? If you're being awkward right now, this is the exact time that you need to hone in. If you don't really care about God, this question has nothing to do with God. So let's get started. All right, so this week we're back to hearing from David. And so in this song, David writes to God. It is Psalm chapter 5, and he starts out the chapter by asking the Lord to listen to him and asking for God to hear him. So he writes in verse 1 here, he says, "Give ear to my words, O Lord, consider my groaning. Give attention to the sound of my cry, my King and my God. O Lord, in the morning you hear my voice. In the morning I prepare a sacrifice for you and watch." So David starts off this song as a prayer, and its purpose is to ask God to hear him. And really, if you think about it, this actually says a lot about David and his heart, because David positions himself at God's mercy, right? And so instead of demanding or expecting that God would hear him, it's more of a desperate ask. It's a request. It's a plead from the heart of David, and this seems to have a heart of humility behind it, which is so crucial in interacting with God. So I guess as we turn it to our lives, have you ever wondered if God hears some of the prayers of people and if he rejects some of other people's prayers? Why does it seem like sometimes it feels like God is hearing you, God answers your prayers, and sometimes he doesn't? Is it possible that he hears some things in a certain way and he accepts that, and he hears things in another way and he rejects that? So think about how you ask your parents for something. Does the way that you ask or the posture of your heart matter in that moment? Let's discuss this a little bit more. Check it out. All right, that's actually a really confusing or sort of a hard to answer question, isn't it? If God answers some prayers and doesn't hear other prayers, or if he listens to some things and he doesn't listen to other things, that doesn't really feel right, does it? That doesn't feel like that's the way that it's supposed to be. And so how do we process that, or how do we view that in a certain light? Well, in verses 3 through 8 of Psalm chapter 5, David says this. He says, "O Lord, in the morning you hear my voice. In the morning I prepare a sacrifice for you and watch. For you are not a God who delights in wickedness. Evil may not dwell with you. The boastful shall not stand before your eyes. You hate all evildoers. You destroy those who speak lies, and the Lord abhors the bloodthirsty and deceitful man. But I, through the abundance of your steadfast love, will enter your house. I will bow down toward your holy temple in the fear of you. Lead me, O Lord, in your righteousness because of my enemies. Make your way straight before me. And we see through David's psalm that there actually is a posture that God accepts, and there is a posture that God rejects. The prideful or boastful, God rejects. Throughout Scripture, time and time again, that concept is introduced, and being humble always gets his attention. James 4:6 repeats this theory when it says that God opposes the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. God holds value in us having humble hearts and rewards the humble with favor. And being humble is actually extremely hard, isn't it? It's not something that comes easy. It's not something that comes natural. But usually when we're feeling vulnerable or we're feeling weak or we feel like we're dumb, we cover up and we try to look confident in every way possible. There's sort of a running theme with life that we try to fake it till we make it, that type of an idea. But to God, we have to understand that posture matters. So take a moment to discuss our second question. Why is it hard to ask for help when we feel insecure or unsure about things? Okay, so we actually see that humility in the way that we approach God really does matter. And to illustrate that point to you a little bit, there's a story that I would have about, like, I have a 5-year-old son, his name's Abram, okay? And so Abram, what if he comes to me and he says, Dad, I made this for you out of Legos, right? And mind you, these are Legos that I purchased from the job that I go to work every day to provide for my family, right? So he says, Daddy, I made you something. Here's this statue I made out of Legos. Okay, now where's my ice cream? Because if I do this for you, then now you're gonna do this for me, right? So I'm giving you this present because I want something from you. And what kind of an attitude or what kind of response would that stir up for me versus, like, let's shift the posture a little bit. What if Abram comes up to me and says, Daddy, I made this for you because I love you. I don't have any money to buy you anything, but I just love you, Daddy. Here's this, will you please take it? And for me as a dad, that just changes the way I would respond to Abram so much. I would respond to him with love and tenderness, and that would be such a beautiful moment that I could share with my son. And in all reality, being humble is a way that you gain favor with God and with people. In the final verse of chapter 5 of Psalm, it says this, For you bless the righteous, O Lord, and you cover him with favor as with a shield. The principle of being humble also applies to how we interact with other people. Do you ever do anything for anyone unless it benefits you in certain ways? Like, that's a question that's really tough to process through, isn't it? Do I only do outward acts for other people when it's in my best interest? And the way that we view others matters too. People are not just commodities. They're not things to be used. They're not just a means to an end. And I would just encourage you, as we talk through the last question we have for Open Table today, that you'd get really honest and you would talk through it. An extra credit would even be this. As you see the question appear on the slide, that you would maybe ask someone close to you how you measure up in this area. So that wraps up our time together today. And before we go, I wanted to quickly remind you about the main takeaway we had from our services last week when we said that when approaching God, the posture of my heart matters more than the work of my hands. And so what that means is that when we approach God, it doesn't matter how much we've done or how much we've accomplished. We don't really have to earn our way into God's good graces or perform our way into getting God to notice or hear us. But really what we have to do is posture our heart. That means have an attitude inwardly that says, God, we know that you are good. We know that you are great. And we humbly come and ask for you to be here with us. And so this week, I hope that this discussion has left you encouraged. And we hope that you would continue the conversation if you feel like that's necessary with one of your leaders as well as your family at home. Thanks so much for hanging out, and we'll see you again next week.